Thank you for tuning into our channel. If you are interested in stories of infidelity and the complex nature of marriage, make sure to subscribe to Cheating Stories Best so you never miss a new update. Today's narrative delves into the emotional turmoil and betrayal that accompany such situations. We're about to explore how one husband confronts the painful reality of his wife's affair. Will he emerge victorious in this battle, or will he be defeated by her deception? Let's dive into this gripping story. Today's tale centers around Opus, who stumbles upon a devastating secret that shatters the foundation of his marriage. Opus is left in utter disbelief when he catches his wife in an intimate encounter with another man. This heart-wrenching discovery leads his wife to abandon their family and run away with her new lover. As we follow Opus's journey, we hope you'll be captivated by the intricate details of his emotional struggle. Now, let's turn our attention to a different but equally compelling moment. Jim and I had just finished our day shift at the plant and were heading home together. It was my turn to drive this week, and as we left the plant, Jim asked if we could make a quick stop at a nearby pharmacy to pick up a prescription for his wife, who had been battling a stubborn cold. As luck would have it, the pharmacy we stopped at was where my wife Rachel worked. Spontaneity struck, and I decided to surprise both Jim and Rachel with a visit. In all the years Rachel had worked there, I had never taken the chance to drop by her workplace. I was hopeful that my sudden appearance would be a pleasant surprise for everyone. Visiting Rachel at work had always been a bit of a sensitive issue for me. I didn't want to make the wrong impression on her coworkers or supervisors. Rachel had never mentioned wanting me to visit her during her work hours, but today felt different. I was determined to make this surprise a positive one. Rachel worked at the pharmacy just 2 days a week, and after 6 years on the job, I thought it was time to meet her boss and show my support. Our 9-year marriage had been comfortable, even if we weren't wealthy. My steady income from the factory provided us with a decent living. Initially, I had preferred that Rachel stay home after our marriage, but she wanted to return to work after a couple of years. She expressed her need to get out of the house, gain independence, and have her own car. Eventually, she convinced me to support her decision, especially since her earnings would help with purchasing the car she desired. A week later, she began working at the pharmacy on the other side of town. Over a year later, we welcomed our daughter Sandy into the world. After Sandy was born, Rachel chose to become a stay-at-home mom for 2 years to focus on raising her. As Sandy grew older, Rachel approached me again, asking to return to work part-time. She had already contacted her former employer, Mr. Clarkson, who agreed to rehire her on a part-time basis. After some consideration, I agreed, and Rachel arranged for her mother to care for Sandy on her workdays. For the past 3 years, Rachel had been working diligently 2 days a week under Mr. Clarkson's supervision. Surprisingly, I had never visited her workplace. Even though Sandy was nearly 6 years old now, I had never taken the opportunity to stop by. Jim and I entered the pharmacy, which was not very large but had all the essentials. The store featured 4 long aisles filled with a variety of items, from cough syrup to other medications. In the back of the store was a room dedicated to prescriptions. We headed there, expecting to find Rachel, but were surprised to see only a middle-aged man behind the counter. He took Jim's prescription and began filling it. I decided to introduce myself and inquire about Rachel's whereabouts, but I hesitated, not wanting to reveal my confusion in front of Jim. While the pharmacist focused on his work, Jim began browsing the store's displays. Seizing the opportunity, I quietly approached the back of the pharmacy, hoping to catch a glimpse of Rachel or find out where she might be. As I wandered through the pharmacy, my gaze was drawn to a framed photograph on a table against the wall. The picture featured a little girl, around 7 or 8 years old. The striking resemblance between this child and my own daughter, Sandy, was immediate and startling. The girl in the photo had the same flowing golden curls, piercing blue eyes, and even a similar smile. I stood there, frozen, my eyes locked on the image as if it held the answers to a question I hadn't yet asked. The uncanny similarity was so profound that it felt as if I was glimpsing Sandy's future self, perhaps just a year or so ahead. The realization struck me like a tidal wave of curiosity. How could this be possible? Summoning my courage, I approached the pharmacist, who was occupied with counting pills. With a hesitant voice, I asked if the child in the photograph was his daughter. To my surprise, he shook his head and replied, "No, I only have 2 boys at home. That's Katie, Mr. Clarkson's daughter." His words echoed in my mind as I scrutinized the photograph once more. "Katie is indeed such a sweet child," I murmured, though I was too stunned to fully process his response. I pretended to examine an object on a nearby shelf, retreating slowly to collect my thoughts. A deep unease settled over me, accompanied by a nauseous feeling at the back of my mind. How could it be that this Katie bore such a striking resemblance to my own daughter? And where was Rachel in all of this? A foreboding sensation prickled at me, hinting at unsettling answers that I wasn't ready to confront. Feeling an urgent need to escape, I found Jim and quietly told him I would wait for him in the car. As I sat alone with my thoughts, it became increasingly clear that Sandy bore no resemblance to me. Her facial features, so different from my own, intensified my anxiety. Rachel and I shared similar traits, brown eyes and dark brown hair, yet Sandy's hair had been bright blonde in her early childhood. I remembered the light-hearted jokes among my friends about my frequent pizza orders or the color of the mailman's hair. These playful remarks had never bothered me before, I knew they were just in jest. But now, those innocent jabs resurfaced and began to haunt me. Doubts gnawed at me relentlessly. Was Sandy truly my daughter, or was she Mr. Clarkson's child? The uncertainty overwhelmed me, making me question my very identity as her father. I found it particularly odd that I had never encountered Carl Clarkson and knew little about his appearance other than that he had blonde hair, a detail Rachel had mentioned in passing a few times. That evening, when Rachel and I were alone at home, she noticed my silent and pensive mood. Concerned, she asked if something was troubling me. Naturally, I didn't disclose my visit to the pharmacy or the disturbing thoughts that plagued me. I wanted to know where Rachel had been during my unexpected visit, but I kept my doubts at bay, understanding the delicacy of the situation. Instead of jumping to conclusions and accusing Rachel of something that might exist only in my imagination, I realized the importance of seeking concrete evidence to either confirm or dispel my suspicions about my daughter's parentage. The mere thought that Sandy might not be my biological child was agonizing. My love for her was boundless, and I was willing to go to any lengths to find the truth. Desperate to rationalize the situation, I clung to the idea that the resemblance between the 2 girls could be a mere coincidence. However, I knew I needed convincing evidence before allowing my doubts to deepen. Despite my attempts to reason with myself, a lingering suspicion remained, refusing to be ignored. When night fell and I lay in bed beside Rachel, the weight of the day's events hit me with full force. If Carl Clarkson was indeed Sandy's biological father, it meant Rachel had been deceiving me from the start, ever since she began working for him 6 years ago. I had always suspected she was still involved with her former lover, and it felt as if she had been misleading me all along. Every time she came home after spending time with her boss, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had safely deceived me, leaving me under the illusion of her fidelity. Her suspicious behavior when she got home had already caught my attention, but now, the possibility of a deeper betrayal was almost unbearable. Rachel would often rush to the shower as soon as she got home, claiming she needed to wash off the lingering chemicals from her work. But to me, it was clear that she was hastily trying to scrub away any traces of her recent infidelity. The following day was Friday, and since Rachel had the day off from her job, I decided it was time to confront Mr. Carl Clarkson, the man I had never met, but who seemed to play a significant role in Rachel's life. After dropping Jim off at his house, I headed over to the pharmacy where Rachel worked. I was determined to finally face Mr. Clarkson, but when I arrived and asked the receptionist where I could find him, she informed me that he had already left for the day. However, she suggested that his assistant, Mr. Mann, might be able to assist me with my inquiry. She pointed toward the back of the office. To my surprise, the man she directed me to was the same person who had filled Jim's prescription the day before. I politely explained that I would come back another time since I had a personal matter to discuss with Mr. Clarkson. As I prepared to leave, the receptionist casually mentioned that Mr. Clarkson was always absent on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, which was curious because those were the exact days Rachel worked. I left the pharmacy feeling more confused than ever. Rachel's role was to assist Mr. Clarkson, yet he was not present during her working hours. This contradiction fueled my suspicions. What was Rachel doing on those days when her boss was absent? Was she meeting him elsewhere, or was there something more sinister at play? After Sandy, our daughter, was born, I had strongly opposed Rachel returning to work. Despite my objections, she persisted, and eventually, I begrudgingly agreed. Now, as I grappled with my doubts about her fidelity, the photograph of Sandy on Rachel's desk only intensified my anxiety. I wondered if Rachel was having an affair with Mr. Clarkson, or if my fears were merely the result of an overactive imagination. My suspicions grew daily, especially since I had no clear picture of Mr. Clarkson. The idea that Sandy might not be my biological child haunted me, fueling my belief that Rachel had been unfaithful for longer than I had realized. Each thought of her betrayal only deepened my frustration and anger. That Saturday morning, while Rachel slept peacefully beside me, I watched her with a mix of admiration and resentment. Her beauty was overshadowed by the nagging thought of her possible infidelity. Throughout the day, we maintained a tense silence, and I found myself speaking mostly to Sandy, deliberately avoiding Rachel. Later that night, I awoke Rachel abruptly, driven by a fierce desire to reclaim what I felt had been taken from me. Our intimacy that night was far from tender. Instead, it was rough and fueled by my need to punish her for her betrayal. Strangely, Rachel never protested or showed any signs of discontent. Her passive acceptance spoke volumes, making me suspect that she might have something to hide. Her silence and compliance led me to believe that she was trying to placate me with physical intimacy, perhaps out of fear. But what was she afraid of? Unless, of course, she had something significant to hide. All Rachel seemed to want was for my anger to dissipate so we could return to our normal routine. Her fear of talking to me seemed palpable, as if she dreaded the possibility of me uncovering her deepest secrets. To maintain her peace and avoid further humiliation, Rachel chose to submit to my demands, enduring the daily indignities I imposed on her. My growing suspicion that she was having an affair with her boss now felt like a certainty. I was convinced that their illicit relationship had been ongoing for years. Once, I had prided myself on being a devoted and attentive husband, but now I used her body solely for my gratification, completely disregarding her needs and desires. The emotional bond between us had dissipated, and I no longer saw her as a cherished partner. In a twisted form of retribution, I indulged in selfish and forceful behavior during our intimate moments, feeling no remorse and believing she deserved it. As time went by, I noticed a deepening anxiety and fear in her expression. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence was palpable. She ate her meal quietly, and I could sense the tension in the air. It seemed she feared I had discovered her affair with Carl. She was reluctant to address the issue directly, avoiding an open conversation. I struggled to understand her fear, as I had never been a violent man. Perhaps she wasn't ready to end our marriage, clinging to the security it provided while simultaneously craving the excitement of her secret relationship. Was her affair causing her to become ensnared in a web of deceit? Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to gather evidence of her infidelity. I planned to take the following Tuesday off and follow her to her place of employment. I was convinced that their rendezvous didn't occur at the pharmacy where she worked, and suspected they met elsewhere to avoid detection. To execute my plan discreetly, I borrowed Jim's truck for the day, which would allow me to tail her without drawing attention. On Tuesday morning, I dressed in my usual work attire, as if everything were business as usual. I picked up Jim from his house, handing him my car keys in exchange for his truck. After retrieving his vehicle, I drove back home and parked a few houses away, positioning myself to get a clear view of my own house. Minutes later, I watched as Rachel, accompanied by Sandy, got into her car. I followed them cautiously, ensuring I didn't attract unwanted attention. As they headed to Sandy's school, I observed my daughter leave the car and walk to school. Rachel, as expected, drove directly to the pharmacy. I parked Jim's truck on the opposite side of the street and settled in, listening to soft tunes on the radio while keeping a vigilant eye on Rachel's red Toyota and the parking area near the pharmacy. I was determined to remain there all day if necessary, convinced that some form of revelation was imminent. About 30 minutes after Rachel entered the pharmacy, my attention was captured by a sleek black SUV pulling into the parking lot. The driver expertly maneuvered into a space next to Rachel's Toyota. A tall, impeccably dressed man, around 35 years old, emerged from the vehicle and approached a separate entrance leading into the pharmacy. As soon as I saw him, it was like a jolt of lightning struck me. This man was the father of the girl in the photographs I had seen earlier. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. He was not only Rachel's lover but also, very likely, Sandy's biological father. A surge of anger coursed through me, urging me to confront him and release my fury. I was also tempted to lash out at Rachel, but I realized that such actions belonged to a period of emotional turmoil that had long passed. I was 6 years too late to act on my rage. Perhaps if I had confronted her after the first or second instance of infidelity, there might have been a chance to salvage our marriage. But after 6 years of continual cheating, which had become a regular occurrence, any hope of repair seemed long gone. The time for reconciliation had passed. It was now time to end things with Rachel and hold her and her lover accountable for their actions. Consumed by thoughts of revenge, I waited in Jim's car until noon, my mind racing with plans for what I would do next. Suddenly, the door to the building opened, and Rachel emerged, hand in hand with her lover. The smiles on their faces were almost theatrical, meant to deceive anyone who might be watching. They climbed into his black SUV, their demeanor that of a contented couple completely unaware of the chaos they had wrought. I followed their vehicle, a task made easier by their leisurely pace. After about 15 minutes on the road, we found ourselves on a rural path leading to a serene lake. Another 10 minutes of winding roads brought us to a charming log cabin perched on the lake's edge. I parked Jim's car about half a mile away, ensuring my presence was concealed. Carefully, I approached the cabin, navigating around the tall, neatly trimmed cedar hedge that provided a natural barrier against prying eyes. As I circled the house, I heard noises coming from an open window on the left side. With cautious steps, I approached the window and peered through the gap. The dim light inside allowed my eyes to adjust, revealing a scene that shattered my world. I saw the silhouettes of a man and a woman, deeply engaged in intimate acts on the bed. The man's face, though obscured in shadow, bore an unmistakable resemblance to my daughter, Sandy. The similarities were striking, the same thin nose, hair color, and eyes. In that moment, all doubts evaporated. It was undeniable, Carl Clarkson, the man with whom Rachel had been unfaithful, was Sandy's biological father. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. All these years, Rachel had deceived me, allowing me to believe that I was Sandy's biological father while mocking my naivety. It was a betrayal so profound that it left me reeling with pain and anger. I wondered if they were already planning to have another child together. Despite the shock and anguish, one truth remained: I loved Sandy with all my heart. She would always be my daughter in my eyes, regardless of the biological truth. However, witnessing Rachel in such a compromising situation was a blow I wouldn't wish on any husband. Overwhelmed by a mix of anger and sadness, I found myself paralyzed, unsure of what to do next. Tears streamed down my face, and self-pity fueled my rage against both Rachel and Carl. I regretted not bringing a camera to capture the evidence of their betrayal. Without it, my path forward seemed uncertain, but I knew that filing for divorce was the only viable option. I needed undeniable proof of Rachel's infidelity to present to the judge, which would bolster my chances of gaining custody of Sandy. The sight of the woman I had once loved involved with another man was unbearable, and I could no longer tolerate their presence. Silently, I returned to the car, my heart heavy with a thirst for revenge. The love I once felt for Rachel was now replaced by a burning desire for retribution. That evening, Rachel came home at her usual time, appearing exhausted from her day at work. Without a word, she headed upstairs to shower while I prepared dinner for our family, as was customary on her workdays. Our conversation was minimal, focused solely on our daughter, Sandy, who eagerly recounted her day at school. The next morning, Rachel had the day off. She donned her robe and joined Sandy and me at the breakfast table. As we ate, the silence between us was palpable. The betrayal had altered everything, and the future that lay ahead was now uncertain, shaped by the painful truth I had uncovered. From time to time, I caught Rachel stealing glances at me when she thought I was preoccupied with my meal. Her face bore an expression that spoke volumes, a strange mix of guilt and apprehension. I began to suspect she feared that I had discovered her affair with her boss, Carl. Occasionally, I even detected a hint of fear in her eyes. One evening, as Rachel was busy cleaning up the dishes in the kitchen, I decided to share a story with her, though it was entirely fictional. I crafted a tale about a factory worker who had been shocked to discover his wife with another man. I described how he had violently confronted his wife upon learning of her infidelity and how his co-workers plotted to punish her lover. Rachel listened in silence, her eyes widening with every detail. Finally, she turned to me and asked if I thought such behavior was justified. I responded calmly, emphasizing that a woman had no right to betray her husband in such a manner. I stressed the gravity of the affair and its consequences, arguing that both the wife and her lover deserved to be punished for disrespecting the sanctity of marriage. The following Tuesday, I took the day off again and borrowed Jim's truck. At noon, I had lunch in my car before putting my plan into action. This time, I drove to a secluded cottage by a quiet lake, fully aware that Carl's black SUV would be parked out front. Armed with a video camera, I prepared to capture undeniable evidence of their infidelity. This proof was essential not only for gaining custody of Sandy but also for revealing the truth to Carl's unsuspecting wife. I wanted to inflict as much pain as possible on Carl for his part in this deceitful affair with my wife. Initially, I had considered using DNA tests to prove that I was not Sandy's biological father. However, I realized that even if I could prove this fact, it could give Rachel grounds to take Sandy away from me in court. Instead, I chose to pretend ignorance and hoped that the videotape of their intimate encounters would be sufficient proof. As before, Rachel and Carl were engrossed in their playful antics on the bed. This time, however, I filmed every intimate detail discreetly. During the filming, I overheard Carl discussing his plans to ensure his wife would never get her driver's license, which would prevent her from following him. Rachel confided in Carl about her fear that I might be aware of their affair, which seemed to increase Carl's nervousness. Having collected enough footage of this betrayal, I returned home and resumed my usual role of cooking dinner while Rachel was at work. She typically finished her shift at 6 o'clock and arrived home around 6:15. It struck me that during these hours, Rachel and Carl must have been involved in their secret meetings from 2:30 to 5:30 p.m. Meanwhile, I had been diligently preparing meals for our family, unaware of the unraveling of our once happy home. That evening, a decision crystallized in my mind. I would leverage their shared fear of me. Although violence was not part of my character, I had to admit that the fictional story of the factory worker had shaken Rachel deeply. Combined with the newfound power I felt over her and the knowledge of her infidelity, it likely contributed to her perception of me. I began to suspect that Rachel was stalling for time, waiting for an opportunity to rid herself of our marriage. Perhaps she eagerly anticipated the day when she could present me with divorce papers, allowing her to find solace in Carl's arms forever. The following Wednesday at dinner, I broached the topic again. I recounted a story about an unhappy husband who had taken revenge on his wife's lover. I vividly described how the lover ended up in a hospital bed, receiving the punishment he deserved. Continuing to stoke Rachel's fear, I mentioned that the betrayed husband had initiated divorce proceedings and was demanding custody of their children. I could feel the intense shock and fear radiating from Rachel as she processed my words. Rachel continued to eat in silence, but the trembling of her hands betrayed her inner turmoil. The next day, after a covert rendezvous, she arrived home looking visibly shaken. Her transparent eyes revealed the fear she was trying to hide from me. During dinner, I intentionally steered the conversation towards her work, subtly probing about her boss, his appearance, his family, and other details I had never cared about before. My sudden curiosity made Rachel uncomfortable, and I could see her anxiety mounting. I questioned her about her duties at the pharmacy and how satisfied she was with her job, deliberately stoking her unease. To reinforce my suspicions, I mentioned that I might surprise her with a visit to her workplace one day. Her face registered shock, but she remained silent, nodding slowly as if struggling to find the right words. Over the weekend, I decided to take Rachel and our daughter Sandy out to dinner, trying to maintain the facade of a loving family. Yet, even Sandy could sense the change in her mother's behavior over the past few weeks. My daughter sought comfort in me, clinging to my side and asking for hugs, showing a clear need for reassurance amidst the tension. As we neared the end of our meal at the restaurant, Sandy excused herself to use the restroom, leaving Rachel and me alone. Seizing the opportunity, I gently asked Rachel if something was troubling her and if she wanted to talk about it. Her confusion and concern were evident as she voiced her worries. "It's been a long time since we've been close," Rachel said, her voice laced with apprehension. "When was the last time we made love?" Her gaze was filled with concern, and it was clear that she was beginning to feel some remorse. Yet, it was equally apparent that confessing her infidelity wasn't on her agenda. Even if she had apologized, I knew it would be too late for forgiveness. The damage done to our marriage and to Sandy was unforgivable. "You know I love you, Roger," she whispered, desperation evident in her tone. "But lately, I don't see love in your eyes when you look at me. It feels like hate." I took a deep breath and met her gaze, unable to hold back any longer. "Tell me, Rachel, are you cheating on me? If so, then our relationship is over, and you will never see our daughter again. I can guarantee you that." My words were final and firm, revealing the truth that had been weighing heavily on my heart. The truth hung in the air between us. Rachel's eyes widened in shock, and tears welled up in her eyes. She abruptly grabbed her purse and fled the restaurant, leaving only an uncertain trail behind her. While Sandy was still in the restroom, I settled the bill and waited for her to return. As I left the restaurant, I saw Rachel standing by the car, her eyes red and swollen from crying, though she seemed to have no more tears left. The following Monday, I approached my supervisor to request a 2-week vacation. The seriousness of the family crisis prompted me to step back and assess my next moves. Initially, my boss hesitated, but after I explained the gravity of the situation, he agreed to grant my request. That evening, I found myself in the parking lot outside Carl Clarkson's house, grappling with the unknown. Sitting in my car, I debated my next steps, feeling compelled to confront Carl's wife, Claudine, and reveal the truth. When I glimpsed her in the backyard by the pool, my resolve strengthened. She was taller than Rachel, with light brown hair similar to my wife's. Gathering my courage, I exited the car and walked to the fence entrance, my heart pounding. As I approached Claudine, I watched her rearrange the chairs around the pool. Finally reaching her, I introduced myself with a trembling voice. "I'm Roger Weldon, and my wife Rachel works with your husband at the pharmacy." For a moment, Claudine's gaze froze in unusual tension, but then a smile appeared on her lips. She extended her hand for a handshake. "Yes, of course, I've heard of Rachel, Though we've never met, she said warmly. As our hands shook in a friendly greeting, it became clear that Claudine was unaware of her husband's affair with Rachel. The weight of the truth I was about to reveal sank in, and I knew that the gravity of this revelation would forever change their lives. I knew that confronting Claudine with the truth would be devastating, but she deserved to hear it directly. Driven by a sense of urgency, I decided it was best to go straight to her and lay everything out plainly. "I apologize for the abruptness of this meeting, Mrs. Clarkson," I began, my tone reflecting the seriousness of the situation. "I have something to tell you that I know will cause you great pain. Your husband and my wife are involved in a long-standing affair." The words hung heavily in the air as Claudine stood before me, her face frozen in shock. For a few moments, she stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. Then, like a dam breaking, tears welled up in her eyes. She remained motionless, unable to speak, until finally, she put her hands over her mouth in sheer disbelief. Before I could explain further, Claudine gathered her composure and asked, "Do you have any physical proof of what you're saying?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "I have evidence of their affair. I have photographs of them together at your lakeside cottage, and I'm afraid there is more evidence that could be uncovered. Their relationship has lasted over 6 years." The gravity of my words hit Claudine hard, and she began to weep uncontrollably. I quickly guided her into the house and helped her to the couch. I waited patiently as she collected herself, then took a seat across from her. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a photograph of my daughter. "This is Sandy, my daughter," I said, showing her the picture. "You'll notice that Sandy bears a striking resemblance to your husband. Look at her blonde hair, her thin nose, high cheekbones. Moreover, she looks remarkably like your own daughter." I turned my attention to the photograph of Claudine's daughter, which was displayed prominently on the mantelpiece. Rising from my seat, I carefully picked up the photo and placed it alongside Sandy's picture on the coffee table. "Look at this undeniable resemblance, Mrs. Clarkson," I said, emphasizing the connection between our daughters. "The resemblance between them is striking. It's clear to anyone who sees them that they could be twins. The evidence speaks for itself, they are sisters, related by blood." As Claudine examined the photographs, her tears ceased momentarily. She clutched the pictures tightly, her gaze locked on them. After a moment, she looked up at me with desperation in her eyes. "What are we going to do?" Taking a deep breath, I replied, "Personally, I've decided to divorce my wife and fight for custody of my daughter. Given the situation, I believe this is the fairest and just course of action for both of us." I acknowledged that this was likely the only reasonable decision, considering the betrayal and deceit we had uncovered. Claudine, still reeling from the revelation, seemed to understand the gravity of our predicament. "Carl will not get away with this betrayal," I assured her. "He will pay for his actions. I strongly suggest you consult a lawyer. If you need, I can provide you with copies of the photographs. However, we should wait a few days before making their affair public. There's a strategic reason for this approach, which I will explain." I retrieved the videotape from my car, and we watched a portion of it together. Claudine continued to cry, overwhelmed by the unfolding truth. After a few minutes, she asked me to stop the tape, needing a break from the distressing footage. Once Claudine had regained her composure, I outlined my plan. "We should wait a few days before confronting the couple with what we know," I suggested. "This will give us time to strategize and ensure that we're fully prepared." With a heavy heart, Claudine reluctantly agreed to this plan. On Tuesday, I consulted with my attorney, presenting him with the photos of the affair. He advised me that gaining custody of Sandy would be challenging, especially since I'm not her biological father. He warned that if Rachel requested a DNA test and it proved I wasn't Sandy's biological father, it could complicate the custody case further. The possibility of a child support lawsuit against Carl could seriously undermine my case. Based on the advice from my attorney and the potential fallout, I realized that pursuing legal action against Carl might result in losing custody of Sandy, an outcome I was desperate to avoid. Faced with this realization, I decided to put a hold on any legal proceedings for the time being. Instead, I needed to devise a plan that would compel Rachel to leave our home and voluntarily relinquish custody of Sandy to me. Determined to protect my daughter's well-being, I began plotting a strategy that would force Rachel into a position where her ability to gain custody would be questioned. My plan involved convincing Rachel to leave with Carl, even if only temporarily. Such a move would create a dubious situation, casting doubt on her fitness as a parent during our divorce proceedings. Given that no DNA tests had been conducted yet to prove I was not Sandy's biological father, it was clear that a judge would likely view a mother embroiled in an affair unfavorably. That afternoon, when Rachel returned from work, her appearance made it evident that she had been unfaithful. Her lips were slick and moist, a clear sign of intimacy. When Rachel realized that I was aware of her affair, tears began streaming down her face. She attempted to apologize, her voice cracking as she expressed her remorse. She repeatedly said she was sorry, trying to convey her regret and commitment to making amends. I remained silent, offering no comfort or response. Her growing unease prompted her to insist that she would end her relationship with Carl and resign from her job. She claimed to love only me and pleaded for my forgiveness, promising to make things right. Despite her earnest tone, it was clear to me that she was lying. The derogatory comments she made about me while with Carl had revealed her true intentions. It was evident that Rachel had already decided to leave me for Carl. The only thing holding her back was Sandy and her fear of my immediate reaction. To push Rachel into making a decisive move, I realized I needed to heighten her fear. I aimed to make her fear not only for her own safety but also for Carl's. I calmly informed her that forgiveness was not an option. I warned her that my revenge on both her and Carl would be agonizingly painful. I deliberately left out the fact that I was not Sandy's biological father, focusing instead on the immediate issue at hand. Later that afternoon, I followed through on my plan and visited Claudine's home. She had sought legal advice from the same attorney I had hired. Claudine shared that her lawyer had already made considerable progress on the divorce papers for both of us. She also revealed that Carl had been acting strangely over the past 24 hours, discreetly loading boxes into his SUV, which led her to suspect he was planning to leave the family. I reassured Claudine, suggesting that this unexpected development could actually benefit her. If Carl decided to abandon his family, it would significantly improve her chances of gaining custody of their daughter. I emphasized that his actions would reflect poorly on him in the eyes of a judge, should it come to that. Rachel did not show up for work on Tuesday. She claimed to have quit her job and vowed never to contact Carl again, but I treated her promises with complete indifference. I knew she was lying. It was clear that she had no intention of staying married to me for much longer. That afternoon, I observed her as she packed her belongings from the dressing room. It was evident she too was preparing to leave. To further stoke her desire to run away with Carl, I deliberately chose to fuel her fears. That same day, I informed Rachel of my plan to deal with Carl the following week. When she asked about the future of our marriage, I simply told her that once I had resolved the issue with her lover, I would decide what to do next. When I looked into her eyes, I saw an unmistakable terror reflecting back at me. It's crucial to understand that violence is not a natural part of my character. Over the years, I had always approached our relationship with tenderness, both emotionally and physically. However, discovering that Rachel had broken our marriage vows over 6 years ago, and had continued to betray me, dissolved the love I once held for her into thin air. This realization transformed me into someone I barely recognized, someone consumed by deep sadness and anger. Despite the turmoil I was experiencing, it didn't lead me to violence. Instead, it drove me into profound emotional distress. The next day, as I walked Sandy to school, I approached the principal with a sense of urgency. I explained the gravity of our situation, emphasizing that Rachel was planning to leave with another man and might even attempt to kidnap our daughter. I insisted that Sandy should not be allowed to leave the school premises with anyone without my explicit permission. To ensure Sandy's safety, I devised a plan. Each day, I would personally drop her off at school and request that she remain inside until I returned to pick her up. This arrangement would keep her under the school's tight security and away from any potential danger. After dropping Sandy off, I returned home, fully aware that Rachel was likely preparing to run away. That evening, I drove to Claudine's house, knowing that my absence might prompt Rachel to contact Carl. I hoped this would lead them to make their move, allowing me to act according to my plan. My goal was to distance myself from Rachel and Carl, and if necessary, relocate with Sandy to the other side of the country. When I arrived at Claudine's house, I found her in tears. She told me that Carl had taken nearly all of his belongings without giving any explanation for his sudden departure. It was clear he was waiting for the right moment to meet with Rachel, probably while I was out. My immediate concern was ensuring that Sandy stayed safe and wasn't taken away. As I drove back to the school, I was horrified to see Carl's car slowly driving past the school grounds, with Rachel accompanying him. When they spotted me, they hurriedly drove away. Thankfully, Sandy was still on the school grounds when I arrived to pick her up. Once home, I gently explained to Sandy that her mother needed to be away for a while to visit a sick relative. I reassured her that everything would be fine, shielding her from the harsh truth of her mother's actions. The following day, I took precautionary measures by changing all the locks on our doors. I met with my lawyer and informed him that Rachel had left and was now in hiding with her lover. I also contacted a real estate agent, requesting immediate assistance in selling the house, which was solely in my name. I made it clear that the sale needed to be expedited. That evening, I reached out to Claudine. Through her tears, she told me that Carl had left a note on their bed. The note revealed that Carl had fallen in love with someone else, prompting him to leave his marriage. He also mentioned that he had consulted with his lawyer the previous week. After the legal battles and emotional turmoil, Claudine's situation took a turn for the better. The house and cottage, once symbols of her painful past, were now solely in her name, along with a modest sum of money left in her bank account. As I looked at Claudine, overwhelmed with sympathy for the challenging circumstances she had faced, I felt a deep sense of responsibility to offer some comfort. I told her how much Sandy, my daughter, was struggling with her mother's absence. In an attempt to bring some normalcy back into our lives, I decided to order a large pizza and a fresh salad. I suggested that Claudine and her daughter, Katie, join us for dinner. To my surprise, just 15 minutes later, Claudine and Katie arrived at my home. Looking back, inviting them to dinner proved to be one of the best decisions I could have made. The evening turned out to be a turning point. Katie and Sandy hit it off immediately, forming a bond that helped ease the pain of her mother's absence. It was a joy to witness their newfound friendship, which provided Sandy with a sense of companionship and comfort. For me, Claudine's presence was equally soothing. We spent the evening in warm, genuine conversation, finding solace in each other's company. Our time together was filled with moments of tranquility and a budding sense of hope. As our relationship deepened, Claudine and I grew closer, and our connection evolved into a meaningful friendship. A few weeks later, Claudine made the decision to sell her cottage and house, moving in with me. Together, we embarked on a new chapter, blending our lives and creating a loving family with our 2 daughters. From the outside, we appeared to be a happy, united couple, a perception that was entirely true. Recognizing the need for a fresh start, I set about selling my old home. Claudine and I discussed the importance of relocating to a place where our pasts couldn't easily catch up with us. We wanted to build a future that was distinctly separate from our previous lives. Within a month of Rachel's departure, we found ourselves in Texas, ready to start anew. In Texas, I leveraged my experience as a successful contractor to build a beautiful home and a welcoming community. Over the years, my career flourished, and I was fortunate to have a dedicated team of 5 working alongside me. It's been 5 years since Claudine and I made the move, and we are seen in our new community as a prosperous, happy couple raising 2 wonderful daughters, Sandy and Katie. Last year, our family grew with the arrival of a baby boy, adding another layer of joy to our lives. Although we haven't heard from Rachel or Carl in years, Claudine and I hold no ill will toward them. Instead, we cherish the fulfilling life we've built together. We've created a home full of love and joy, and each day is a reminder of how far we've come from the shadows of our past. Our story is a testament to the power of new beginnings and the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the challenges we faced, we found happiness and contentment in our life together. The past may have shaped us, but it no longer defines us. Our family is a testament to love, renewal, and the promise of a brighter future.